If I wanted to put on 10 pounds of good quality, lean body mass, good quality muscle in a couple of months, this is what I'd do. Number one, I would do miniature bulks and cuts throughout the course of the week. Way too many people, in my opinion, like to go full bore into bulking mode. That obviously lends itself to fat accumulation. There's surmounting evidence now that suggests gaining fat while building muscle is not necessary. Sure, it's easy to just go out and eat a lot of food, but then you have to do the work to get the fat off. And that means that you sacrifice muscle in that process. It's better to sort of quote unquote main gain, if you will, where you're maintaining but gaining a little bit. But you can pull those levers pretty hard if you want to. So what I mean by miniature bulks and cuts, I might have one day where I'm at a slight deficit to stay lean, and then the next day I might be at a decent surplus. Deficit, surplus, in no random order. All that matters to me is that at the end of the week, I'm in a slight surplus. For me, probably about 1,000 to 2,000 calorie surplus at the end of the week, maybe a little more. So a little bit of a surplus, but nothing crazy. And I'm doing it so incrementally that I'm able to control it really easily. As a matter of fact, if I feel like I put on a little too much fluff one week, I can aggressively reduce calories 2 or 3 days out of the week without feeling like all is lost or I need to start over again. Next up, I wouldn't stop doing cardio, but I would change my cardio from a little less of the high intensity stuff to more of the zone 2 work. Now, the zone 2 work unfortunately requires more of a time commitment. I would probably ruck. The reason that I would choose rucking, and this is not just a promotion for rucking, there's a reason why I would do it. Rather than going for a 2-hour walk, I could go for maybe a 75-minute walk with some weight on my back that actually gets a little more load in my legs and potentially preserves muscle simply by stimulation of my legs. Personally, I lose muscle in my legs first. It's the last to grow and the first to lose it, but it's all good. Anyhow, by having a ruck on my back and adding that weight, I get myself into zone 2 without a lot of exertion and without a lot of biomechanical stress. And that zone 2 is going to be much better when it comes down to a percentage of fat used as fuel, and it's going to be more muscle preserving. I love my high intensity work. I love it all the way, but it does come with more of a risk of burning muscle. Even when people say you can do high intensity interval training and it preserves muscle, that's true, but you don't get as much fat loss when you're doing short stints of high intensity. I prefer doing longer stints of zone 2 and being able to preserve my energy to really be able to give it my all in the weight room. Because if I'm trying to build muscle, you better believe intensity is my focus. Now, without getting too much into exercise science, that's not really my wheelhouse. I leave that to my buddy Mike Israetel. With that, I do know that intensity matters, and it matters no matter what rep range you're at. So either way, I'm pushing it pretty hard. Next up, I would increase my creatine from 3 to 5 grams a day up to 10 grams per day. I would probably even go more so, but after 10 grams, I start to notice it a little bit here in the face, and that's just me personally. Now, creatine is one of these substances that has so much literature behind it as far as safety and efficacy. I would personally feel comfortable going up to 30 grams without an issue if I didn't mind the water retention. But doing what I do, I like to stay lean and I have to look a certain way, so I don't want to go above 10 grams. But the literature is just too strong to ignore. As you start increasing the dosage of creatine, 10 grams really starts to be where you see the muscle hypertrophy effects from the strength. You get so much of a clear change between that 5 gram and that 10 gram mark that it's hard to ignore. So I would increase that creatine, and what I would likely do is I would dose it throughout the day so I have less risk of getting water retention from it. I put a link down below for the creatine that I use. I use these allulose sweetened creatine gummies from Create. They have 4 different flavors. They're sweetened with allulose, so they're not adding a bunch of sugar into them and things like that. There's like 1 or 2 grams of sugar for a few gummies, but it's negligible and it actually potentially helps the uptake of the creatine in the first place. So they're using allulose, which offsets the sugar in the first place because it occupies the same GLUT2 receptor. What I mean by all this is it's a nice way to be able to microdose your creatine throughout the day. There's 1.5 grams of creatine per gummy. So if I'm trying to get maybe to 10 grams of creatine per day, I might take maybe 5 to 8 gummies per day, somewhere in that ballpark. And that way I'm getting a sustained release, I'm not gonna get the water retention, and it also tastes good. And the sour apple flavor and the watermelon flavor are awesome. So anyhow, that link down below is 50% off. 50% off for Create Creatine Gummies. So check them out after this video. Next up, after my workouts, I would have a mixture of whey protein and regular protein. And this would be the case whether I was building muscle or not, especially if I'm not building muscle, because then I can consume this meal and then go the rest of the day without eating and not worry about it. So after my workout, I'd have 30 grams of protein from whey protein and probably an additional 40 to 50 grams of protein from lean ground beef or lean ground chicken. That's a lot of protein in one sitting, but the literature suggests now that we can handle that. That means that I've got a few hours of digestion that I don't have to really worry about trying to pound more protein, taking up my day, trying to like slave away with lots of different meals. So that would definitely be my take. The other thing is that whey protein absorbs fast. If I wanted just having a whey protein shake, that would be in and out of my system very quickly. So I do like to have the whey protein so it absorbs fast and then have something slower acting like the ground beef as well. I would also add TMG, trimethylglycine, into the mix. I rotate 4 to 6 grams of trimethylglycine in and out of my diet anyway. But if I was trying to build muscle, I would lean towards a little bit more. I'd probably go on the 6 gram side of TMG. There was a study that was published in the International Society of Sports Nutrition. In this case, they gave subjects only 2.5 grams of trimethylglycine. What they found is just doing this alone, along with resistance training, increased muscle cross-sectional area above the placebo group. And there's other studies that demonstrate that muscle mass increases. We don't really know why, and more research clearly needs to be done. But we also know there's a huge fat loss effect with TMG. So potentially building muscle, potentially losing fat, but we also know that it contributes to what's called the methyl pool. Okay, so trimethylglycine is a methylated form of the amino acid glycine. The glycine and the methyl group break off, and you're left with a methyl donor. What that means is that you have more ability to methylate the extra energy that might be disposed while you're eating more calories. So a lot of people combine TMG with, for example, NMN for longevity. Nicotinamide mononucleotide combined with TMG. Huge benefits there because it sort of counteracts the negative aspect of creating more energy. Well, if you're eating more, you might be creating more energy as well. So it just makes sense that maybe it'll offset and help contribute more to the methyl pool, which allows you to methylate more and maybe build more muscle. So that could be one of the reasons why it's working so well for muscle mass, as long as your diet's in check. But what do I know? There's no literature to back that part up. The next thing I would do is I would add carbohydrates post-workout. I am not a huge carbohydrate guy. Even on my high carbohydrate days, I might have 120 grams. On my low carbohydrate days, I'll have 10 grams. I don't eat a ton of carbs, but when I'm building muscle, make no mistake, carbs will help muscle building. Can you build muscle on a ketogenic or low carb diet? Absolutely, positively, yes, you can. Is it as optimal as building muscle with carbs? No, make no mistake. If you want to build muscle with keto, you can, but building muscle with carbs is a little easier. So I would add carbs post-workout. I would probably add about 40 to 50 grams post-workout, and I would probably do it from some simple digesting source. I probably would have like a carbohydrate type powder in this case, because I want something that's easy to digest. And you're looking at me saying, that's not ancestral. How dare you? Point is neither gobs and gobs of muscle. That's not ancestral either. You didn't see the cavemen walking around with 20-inch biceps. I wish mine were 20 inches. They're not. Point is, it's not natural looking. It's not realistic. We do freakish things to get freakish bodies. So let's be real here. A little carbohydrate powder or something like that ain't that bad. I've toyed around with, mind you, no fiduciary obligation to say this, I've toyed around with the Momentous Fuel carbohydrate powder post-workout. I tend to like that one because I don't get a blood sugar spike at all. It doesn't need to be high glycemic. I just get the carbs in, and it helps blunt the cortisol so I can get into a recovery phase and grow. Number 7, I would probably add a few more omega-3s surrounding my protein intake. Solid evidence of omega-3s increasing P70S6K activation, mTOR activation, ultimately muscle protein synthesis. But again, like I've mentioned in other videos, too much omega-3 is problematic too. So I might add maybe 2 grams of omega-3s alongside each time I have a large bolus of protein, just to help out with a little bit more muscle protein synthesis. One thing to add on top of that is when I can't get a whole lot of protein in for whatever reason, I do like to have essential amino acids on hand, because combining essential amino acids with protein can actually increase the muscle protein synthesis of the protein that you consumed. So basically you're adding a scoop of essential amino acids and making more leucine availability, so the protein you do eat potentially is more potent. This next one is controversial, and you need to talk to a doctor about this one. No, it's not testosterone replacement. Although I would say if I was to go on testosterone replacement, it would certainly help me build muscle. And although I'm not ready for that commitment, I am very bullish on it. And I think that it's very, very helpful and complementary for a lot of people when they're trying to build muscle. But what I'm talking about is BPC 157. Now, when I start lifting heavier, the risk of injury and aches and pains and nagging things, that ends up quite a bit higher. Now, BPC is a research peptide, so you do have to talk to a doctor about getting BPC. And recently, it's getting harder and harder to find the actual injectable peptide version, so you have to talk to your doctor about that. But I do know that the oral version is still available, and although the oral version, even though a prescription formula, doesn't necessarily have the potency as the one that you would use, say, an insulin pen for, it's still effective, and it still contributes to more gut lining healing, which could be very interesting. So essentially, it's creating more angiogenesis, it's creating more vascularization to an area. It may even help with muscle growth, but that would very much so be off-label, so I can't say if it really does that or not, but the literature makes it seem like it's quite possible. So you gotta talk to your doctor about that one. The ninth and final thing that I would do is I would adopt principles that I learned from Dr. Mike Israetel. He taught me about maximum recoverable volume. What that means is we have a finite amount of recovery and volume that we can handle. So if I go out and I get in an argument with a stranger and I start hitting him with my backpack and he comes back at me and says he's gonna sue me, I'm gonna get stressed out. And that's gonna pull from my recoverable volume. That means I might only be able to handle 9 sets at the gym instead of 10. People threaten to sue me all the time, so maybe I can get 9.5 sets. Point is if I'm inflicting stress upon my life by doing things, or I have a terrible relationship where my girlfriend yells at me every time I shave my cat in the kitchen sink, then I'm not gonna be able to put my effort into the gym as much as I would like to either. Now, it also has to go for cardio. If I go and I do too much cardio, it's gonna pull from my recoverable volume over here. We only have so much. It's not in isolation. So I would apply these principles with how I live my life. If I wanted to build more muscle, I'd probably say, okay, I need to keep this in check here, maybe not be so stressed out, yada, yada, however it applies. The other thing is I'd focus on the stretch. Mike Israetel did teach me that being in that stretched position is definitely a good place to be able to build muscle. So doing things like skull crushers where I'm doing a JM press. We did a video on Mike's channel about that, getting a full stretch in the tricep. It does seem to induce a little bit more growth, possibly draw those satellite cells to fuse and build more muscle. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.